All right, very excited to have Adam Coleman here. He just published another article with the New York Post. Calling Justice Thomas Uncle Clarence exposes the rotten sham that is the progressive movement. Adam, you also founded Wrong Speak Publishing, and I always like to give people a shout out at the beginning if I remember it, just so that folks can follow you. So before we get into your article, where's the best place for people to connect with you after they see this?
I'm very active on Twitter, so they can follow me at wrong_speak. As far as like Wrong Speak itself, there's a lot of information on there, so they can go to wrongspeak.net. They can find out more about me, the articles I've written for a variety of publications, and the other writers that are associated with Wrong Speak as well. So I would highly advise checking them out.
Okay. All right. So let's get into this article. Basically, I'll just read the paragraph that I shared with my locals community, and then I got some questions that came in from them. Let's go all the way down here. Okay. You cannot claim to be pro-Black while selectively caring about which Black person takes racial abuse. You cannot claim to be anti-racist if some racism is okay with you. You do not have to support Clarence Thomas's political positions to find something highly unconscionable about how the man has been treated based simply on his race. So give us the background on this article. What inspired you to write it? What was going on that you felt like you needed to address? And why? Like, take us to that paragraph too. Why did it bring you to that thought?
I'll bring it all the way back to my book. I wrote an entire chapter discussing how it's perfectly fine within politics and even culturally to use racial epithets towards Black conservatives, Black Republicans, or anybody who seems to veer away from whatever narrative you think that fits a Black person. So I wanted to use this opportunity to discuss it because normally no one cares. But because there's such a spotlight on Roe v. Wade, in translation on Clarence Thomas, I wanted to use this opportunity to show how this is a very left-leaning tactic that is directly put upon Clarence Thomas. And so, yeah, I basically just wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. The other thing is, for the better part of a year or so, I've been talking about progressives and how they're hypocritical without saying the R word, that they're racist. And this was just a perfect opportunity to highlight that these people are racist. Ultimately, I think most progressives are classists. And it's easy to be a racist if you're like kind of an elitist mentality. But I wanted to show how this is the case when it comes to progressives. I remember once someone told me on Twitter, like, I don't think this is racial per se. And so my response is, well, how come they don't call Brett Kavanaugh Uncle Brett? Like, do you think we're stupid? We understand why they're using this. We understand that it is only used against Black people who are on the right. And, so that's a bit of a gaslight when people say stuff like that. Like, oh, what we're seeing is not really happening, or like it happens on the left too. It really doesn't. When it comes to Black conservatives or Black Republicans, they're a minority within a minority. And because of that, no one really cares. Politically, no one cares, even socially. So it's perfectly fine. And the thing I highlight even in my own book is no one ever loses their job. No one's going to get canceled because they called Clarence Thomas the N-word. Nothing will ever happen to them. At most, you get articles like this who kind of wag their finger. And maybe there's a little bit more of that today with this Clarence Thomas situation because it's such a big, it's such an eye-opening experience for people who haven't been paying attention to it. But before this, really, no one cares. No one will ever lose their job. No one will get canceled.
Do you think that there is a split when you talk about the progressive movement, that there's a split within it of people who would be equally embarrassed of this kind of language within that movement, because in my audience, I noticed a breakdown of people. Like a guy just commented, I've been voting Green Party since 1995 and I'm totally embarrassed by the left. And I find that whatever it is within the liberal space, that it's not like that. Actually, there are people calling BS on it, even within that own, their own party. And I don't know how to talk about that anymore. It feels like politics are all kinds of upside down. What is left? What is right? Does right mean left now? Left means right. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. But do you come across that? People who even would consider themselves a progressive that would agree with you?
So I think part of the confusion is that the progressive movement has basically been hijacked. So someone who may have seen themselves as progressive, who voted for the Green Party, who champions certain concepts and certain ideas, that's from years ago. The current progressive movement is basically neo-Marxist, the anti-racist. It's in an elitist progressive movement that we see today. It's not the same as what existed years ago, which is why those very people who are being principled, who say this isn't right, I've met just moderate liberals who said the same thing. Like, I don't like Clarence Thomas, but this isn't cool, and that's fine. Those are the people that I'm not pointing my finger at them. I'm pointing my finger at the anti-racists, at the neo-Marxists, because whether they are black or white or whatever race, ethnicity, they tend to justify this. They tend to say, well, because he did this and he did that, he deserves it, which just goes to show the hypocrisy of these particular progressives. They're the ones who have been chastising Americans for the past 2 years about how we have this implicit bias. Not too long ago, they tried to say that conservatives or people on the right don't like interracial marriages. But all I've seen is people on the left, especially the progressives, constantly bringing up that he has a white wife, as if that means something. Rex Chapman, not too long ago, it was a day or two ago, I tweeted at him, and obviously he's not going to respond to me, but I tweeted at him, you keep bringing up that he has a white wife because you're a racist, which, that's what it is. But how come you don't say anything about Kamala Harris? You don't say anything about Ketanji Brown Jackson, right? These are interracial couples. These are black people. Are they less black because of so, right? So it's this, I personally think they use it and they weaponize it because deep down, they really don't like interracial marriages. That's what I'm saying. It's not I think some people think that they're willing to use it to attack, and they really don't have a problem with interracial relationships. I think they're willing to use it in attack because they really don't like interracial relationships. It's just that they're willing to hold their nose when it is politically satisfying.
You have a graph here saying that Samuel L. Jackson gave the racist bat signal to all his white elitist progressive allies when he tweeted, "How's Uncle Clarence feeling about overturning Loving v. Virginia? Today it's Uncle Clarence, but tomorrow it can be Uncle Samuel, and that's the point he's missing." What did you mean by that?
What I mean is, if Samuel Jackson a week from now says something that is deviating from whatever people assume that he should believe or should say as a black man, they will put him under question. I've seen this before. Perfect example, I put it in my book. When Ice Cube, during the election, it was actually towards the end of the election season, Ice Cube had what he called like a plan for Black America. And he wanted to talk to both candidates about this plan because he didn't know who was going to win. So he went to the Biden campaign. Biden campaign said, "We'll talk to you after the election." The Trump campaign, he went to them. They were willing to sit down and listen to his ideas. Because of this, because he sat down and talked to them, then he got lambasted by other people trying to say that he's a Trump supporter, trying to, they're basically attacking his blackness. attacking what he stands for, all because he sat down with the Trump campaign. And from his perspective, all he cares about is the outcome, helping Black people. That's all it was about. If Trump gets into office, if he had won the election, why not sit down with the president? Because he has power to do certain things that could benefit Black people. That's his perspective. But he's not allowed to do that. He didn't even say, I support Trump. He didn't even say, I like Trump. He just recognizes that he may be potentially the president after this election. It's even just that minor of a deviation, doing something that people think you're doing something that people think you're not supposed to do. As a Black male or even Black females, they get it too. But as a Black American, that's not allowed. And so the point I'm making is that if Samuel Jackson one day comes out and has a viewpoint that is moderately to the right, or that is outside the box of what people normally think, they'll be attacking him. They'll be using coon gifs. They'll be going after him, suspect, and all this other stuff. They'll attack his race because of it, and it'll come from all different nationalities. So that's the point. The point is that I may not like Samuel Jackson saying that, right? I may not like Samuel Jackson at all, but if that was to happen to him, and we're on different sides politically, I still would not like that, because I'm principled. I'm the actual anti-racist. I'm actually against racism, no matter what your political beliefs are. And I think it's morally wrong. And that's ultimately what I want to get at, is for people to understand, this article really isn't about Clarence Thomas. This article is about morality. It's about what's right. And it's not right to put this onto anybody, despite what you think about them.
And again, this in the New York Post, so everybody can go read it. Calling Justice Thomas Uncle Clarence exposes the rotten sham that is the progressive movement. In a second, Adam, I want to ask you about this Good Morning America video that they tweeted, where they say that a previous tweet erroneously stated Jackson is the first Black Supreme Court justice, and everybody jumped on them because they're like, forgetting about somebody here. And then they're like, okay, actually, first Black female Supreme Court justice in U.S. history. But before we get to that, in honor of Wrong Speak Publishing, everybody go get yourself a Rogue Malbec for July 4th, all right? AllisonWinePromo.com. You get 50% off the wine and 50% off shipping. One of them comes from almost 9,000 feet. It's an extreme altitude Malbec. All of these are very unique. They're grown in very remote regions of Argentina, and it helps you support my work. Again, 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. You can also get yourself a cup of coffee at twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. There's a wide variety of roasts from Nicaragua. They're all USDA certified organic. It's a small family-owned company. All the jobs are there in Nicaragua, where they roast, harvest, and grow the beans. There is a Katura tea if you're a tea drinker, which is great. It's tea made from the coffee fruit around the coffee bean. I like to cold brew mine 24 hours. Quite good. So go to twinenginecoffee.com or AllisonWinePromo.com. Help support my work. And don't forget also to check out AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can be part of my editorial board. We just had an editorial board meeting this morning. You can give me feedback from the week before, story ideas for the week ahead. Tell me how much you loved this interview with Adam. Whatever you want, get it off your chest. So, Adam, let's go back to Twitter for a second. Let's look at this. So sure. We were just talking about, right, how originally Good Morning America had tweeted. Thank God for Twitter and people screenshotting things, I'll tell you what, because they probably would have just buried that one. Where they had the video of the swearing in of Ketanji Brown Jackson, and they said that she was the first Black Supreme Court justice. And they were like, oh, whoops. Because everybody pointed it out that she was the first Black female, because we have Clarence Thomas. So anyway, let's talk about Clarence Thomas. Just, I guess, do you feel like because he's a conservative, he hadn't gotten the like pomp and circumstance that you might in other ways, like first this, first that, first whatever, just because his ideology or his political leanings may be different?
Well, we don't want to also forget Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall, yeah. Sorry, thank you. So also, yeah. So it's even worse than just Clarence Thomas. So yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah. So what's up with that?
I mean, so part of me thought, all right, I see what they were trying to do. They forgot the word female or woman or whatever they were going to put. But I found it interesting because it wasn't just on Twitter; it was also on their YouTube account. So I don't know if it was a copy paste. malfunction or if it was purposefully done, or they were avoiding using the word woman or female because politically that for whatever reason it's weird to even talk about it. So I don't know. I try to have a little bit of good faith in the mainstream media, just a fraction of good faith. But I don't know. It's quite possible it was just an oversight by whoever runs their social media. But we didn't necessarily need this to happen to know that there's a level of disrespect when it comes to Clarence Thomas.
Okay, let's go back to your article one more time too. At the very end, you say the veil has been lifted, and this is who they are. The progressive movement is a sham along with its boutique anti-racism ideology. What is boutique anti-racism ideology?
Basically, the true believers in it, one thing I kept noticing, like the loudest voices about it, they're typically of the economically elite. They're typically, whether they're economically elite or they're in a position of power, of influence, right? They're not the average working class person, generally speaking. They may even be part of the managerial class of Americans. The same people who just say, just stay at home and work from home, right? It's, because they don't have that concept that there's people who can't do that. So the reason I say boutique is because it's like this special ideology that they learned in their liberal arts school. And now we're going to teach you ignorant people all about it. The reason why America is the way it is because we have to now teach you. You didn't learn this. It's a very pompous ideology, and it's also very racist. But it's a very pompous ideology because they think they're hip on the trend of they think neo-Marxism is just some new trend that they can employ and chastise Americans with. So I see it like many other things. It starts at the very top. They think that they're onto something that most people don't know about, and because they know about it and other people don't, it means that it's special. I can't ignore the class aspect when it comes to the anti-racist movement. I can't ignore that Ibram X. Kendi quite possibly is a millionaire. Robin DiAngelo is quite possibly a millionaire. Like all these anti-racist figures, Ta-Nehisi Coates, quite possibly, I don't know if he's a millionaire or very close to, but he's very wealthy. You can go down the list of mainstream media people who are believers in this stuff. And then it trickles down to, let's say, outside the millionaires, but down to, let's say, administrators in schools, right? These are people who are highly educated or quote unquote educated, highly educated, who are now put in a position to lead ordinary people and ordinary people's children. And so they're all behind stuff like DEI. They're all behind the CRT stuff or aspects of CRT within public schools and even private schools. So I can't ignore there's a class element to this. The anti-racist movement isn't being pushed by miners, by McDonald's workers, by just average people who make a middle-class living. It's not really being pushed by them. Maybe there's some people who believe in it, right? But very little from what I can tell. As someone who's just an average American, who's around average Americans, they don't act and behave the way that I think these people expect. I know that there's special circumstances like San Francisco or maybe New York City where it seems to be hyper focused on this stuff, and maybe it's more racialized, maybe it's more prevalent there. But outside of that, for the vast majority of the country, like people are just people. And I just feel like it's from the top trying to push this down on the rest of us, like it's their boutique religion.
What do you think about journalists going through training for this, and you name some of the people who are brought in, like Ibram Kendi, and they're taught that this is really the correct way to look at issues of race. And if you cover them with a different perspective, I think the subtext is not just that you're wrong, but you could go to HR. I'm just curious what you think about moving that into the space of journalism. I know you're writing opinion pieces, but you're writing them for a mainstream outlet. And I know my old TV news company, which was one of the largest, like I think third or fourth largest in the country, is mandating all employees go through that training. What do you think about that?
I'm adamantly against it. You know, I kind of feel like anti-racism is racism with a smile, right? It's a form of having people see people at face value, but just that, nothing deeper, just a very superficial look of the world. Was it Ibram X. Kendi who said that it's not a matter of if there's racism, but where, right? Which is a very like paranoid thing to say. Like replace racism and say like, it's not a matter of if the government is involved, but where the government is involved. You would think that person's kind of paranoid. And in many respects, anti-racism, if you truly believe in this stuff, it's a very paranoid look at the world. And I question if some of those people truly believe in this stuff. Maybe it's hard to tell. But if you do, there's a reason why I hear people who are leftists or progressives who are following along with this who say, I'm exhausted. It's like, yeah, it's exhausting looking at people's race all the time and wondering what their motives are and being fearful of them. And, you know, it's a toxic view of the world. It really is. So for me, it's not a matter of, you know, does racism exist? Of course it exists. We just talked about it, right? It's coming from the very people who tell us that there's racism everywhere. It is because they're part of the problem. They're the perpetrators of it within our society, and they have institutional control. So do I like that journalists are being trained this way? No, I don't like that anybody's being trained this way. I don't like that anybody's being forced to take on this ideology or be judged when they criticize it. I don't like it at all.
Have you, are you familiar with the case of Roland Fryer, the Harvard professor? Okay, I was just curious. I wanted to show you this quick clip. I had the filmmaker for the documentary Harvard Canceled Its Best Black Professor Why on to talk, and I want to just play like a quick minute of it and just get your thoughts on this, because I think it brings up some of the stuff that you were talking about. Let me know if you can't hear it, okay?
Okay.
And when he found some nonsense, he called it nonsense.
Let's get past the bullshit, because we can actually get this stuff done. It's not what to do. The question is, do we have the courage to do it?
Roland's work represents a mortal threat to some of the most powerful Black people at Harvard. Consider Claudine Gay, the daughter of an engineer who went from Exeter directly to Stanford, then to Harvard. She's a silky smooth corporate operator. Her signature accomplishment is a Harvard-wide inequality initiative.
The world is awake to inequality and systemic racism, and anti-Black racism in particular, really like never before.
It's a standard array of task forces, symposiums, buzzwords promising equity and inclusion.
A way of bringing this all together into an agenda that feels complementary and synergistic.
Or take Larry Bobo, a man who regularly attacks Roland's work in his classroom. Bobo is the product of privilege, born to a physician in a cozy suburb of Nashville. A longtime professor of African American studies, Bobo has reached the coveted apex of his profession by doing this.
Racism. You see, racism. It's a terrible wound of slavery and attendant racism.
This is the soft porn of Black pain, an empty, endless recitation of victimhood. that gives ample moral pleasure to the audience, but actually accomplishes nothing for the kids Roland cares about.
YouTube always
number
has
one
to mess
drug
up
out
my
there in
videos
the
by
world.
putting in
It's
ads
that
right in the
morning
middle
cup
of the good
coffee,
stuff.
the large amount of caffeine.
Here we go.
He's not into the minstrel show.
You got to do this part.
He's more likely to tell you something like, you don't know a damn thing about what Black people's problems are. And he's more likely to say that not only to you if you're white, but if you're one of these bow tie wearing domesticated Negroes who's never seen the inside of a housing project, he might tell you a little bit of something about that. He might tell you you don't know what a crack house is. You ain't never been anywhere near where there's gunfire crying out at 2 o'clock in the morning. You don't know where it came from. That's what he's likely to say. They don't like those kind of people at Harvard, I've noticed.
That guy. Okay, so yeah, and Fryer's back, and people should check out this documentary if they want. Why did Harvard cancel his? Well, that was my video, but they called it Harvard canceled his best Black professor. Why? So go check it out. Rob was on, and it was a really interesting chat with him. But yeah, when he's talking about, well, they were talking back and forth about a couple different people, but they were specifically focusing on Claudine Gay and Mr. Bobo, as opposed to Roland Fryer, basically juxtaposing that you have these people who they are all Black, but some came from very privileged backgrounds. And Roland, his mom abandoned him when he was like a day old. And they say in the documentary, he learned how to drive stick shift by picking his dad up from jail. I think his dad was a drug addict and got a basketball scholarship and worked his way all the way up, just blood, sweat, and tears. And that he had different ideas, given his background, different ideas about how to help kids like himself from where he came.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a challenge. So I wanted to ask you about academia. We were just talking about journalism. How does that affect, I guess, the folks that you're talking about who are like tweeting Uncle Clarence? What's the role of academia and all that?
They have a huge role in it. That's why I say I cannot ignore the class aspect. You just said it. All these people who are chastising this man who grew up in a troubling childhood and had to work and build himself into something. These are people who are of the elite. They grew up in elite surroundings. Parents were elites. Then they go to elite institutions to teach in elite institutions. I cannot ignore that aspect. And then how they treat him once he says, actually, you guys are a bit off base about some of this stuff, right? And I don't even know if Roland Fryer is a conservative or anything, but the fact that he started talking about, like, actually, here are my findings. And from what I remember, it was some of his findings even surprised him. And the fact that, he basically, it's almost like he threatened to show that the game is rigged, right? And they didn't like that, so they had to discredit him. They had to go after him. But I can't ignore that aspect that these people are of the economic elite. It's one of my big issues with thinking that majority of Black people or all Black people are just poor and down and out, and that we can never possibly be elitist. But clearly, right there, like, we have elite Black people who are very much so. They very much so have a microphone in our society, right? They're the Ibram X. Kendis, right? The people that you just showed on that video. These are the people who are educating the future elite to think this way, right? To behave this particular way. And they gain notoriety off of this. They have conferences. They travel all over the country, right? And then it leaks down into school boards and administrators, the mind of administrators, to implement the stuff on the rest of us. These people have power in our society. And because they are Black, we're supposed to just take it for face value. But they're elite, right? I've been saying for the longest time, there's very little difference between a Black elitist and a white elitist, a Black millionaire and a white millionaire. There's not much difference between them. They have the same interests. They have the same kind of goal. They have the same kind of mindset, right? And if they are nefarious, they're nefarious. It doesn't really matter what they look like at that point. So when I see all these people who have economic means and they have power and they have influence, and then they go around ensuring that people behave a particular way and speak for Black Americans and dictate ideologies, like I said, boutique ideologies. They sit in classrooms and hypothesize how people should behave and how people really think, when it's completely off base. That's not how normal people move about, but they have zero idea of some of the troubles that people go through and how people actually interact outside of those fancy schools that they sit in all day.
One of, I guess, the fascinating aspects of how Roland Fryer was treated by Harvard for me was that, I guess, whatever the problem is that you're trying to fix, or you say you're trying to fix, if you found somebody who had an idea that seemed to be working, I don't know, and you feel like there's just this sludge, I guess, that for decades people have been forced to walk through, and you find the guy who's like, hey, I figured out a way out. You'd think that you would want to listen to that guy instead of go, come on, dude. Because I remember watching him go back and forth. It was a white guy. I think he worked for Wired. And it was funny because the white guy's like, no, you just can't. You just can't get out of this background of being told constantly that you're not good enough, you're lesser than, you're all these things. And Roland's like, but wait a second, why don't we, let's try this. Let's just try. We haven't. I was like, you can't. It's like, it's irreversible. There's no way out. And I'm like, there's a Black dude telling you right now that he figured out a way, he did it. And you just keep writing off what he's saying as he just couldn't possibly know what he's talking about. And I'm like, if you really cared about the cause, wouldn't you want to listen to every single person who's been able to figure out, just even if all you did was just say, okay, well, maybe we just take this part, but we add this other part, you don't necessarily jump, totally in on it, but you at least listen to them. You don't just write them off and try to get rid of their idea as, I don't know, just fantastical or working for the white man or whatever the ad hominems that have been thrown his way. It just seems weird. Does it call into question that you really don't, like they said in the documentary, actually care about fixing the problem?
Yeah, it's not. It's the veneer of caring. That's basically what it comes down to. It's the savior mentality. I'm slowly working on my second book, but it's going to be talking about the savior mentality. It's this concept that saviors don't actually care about their victims, right? And we've placed Black Americans as the victims of American society. And yet we have saviors who keep speaking for us as victims who don't actually care about us, right? It's the illusion of caring. It's the mentioning. It's the, we're going to give you one, right? But you didn't earn it. We gave you one because you need us, right? And that's ultimately a huge problem that I see that's become popular, that especially within the progressive anti-racist kind of movement that's going on, this idea that people need to do for Black people because they're incapable of doing for themselves. And it doesn't even matter what race they are, whether they're Black or white. The problem is that they believe this. They truly believe that they can't do these things without someone else's help. So that's where my fundamental issue is, when all solutions to help Black people, for one, is always on a national scale, or it's always a Black community, right? That's not how things actually function in our society. So that's why they always run to the federal government to do something, right? Which is the most inefficient way to do anything, to help anybody. But they keep doing it. Why? Because it'll never work. They don't actually care, right? If they really cared, what they would do is make it more local, right? So if you say there are neighborhoods within Atlanta that are struggling, okay, what do? You petition the local government to do certain things to benefit those people within that particular area. That's how you actually help them. If you want to even do it on a governmental basis, not all solutions come through the government. If you have all these Black millionaires who say they care, I care about my community, I want to do for my community, well, then go in and reinvest within your community. Create community centers. support, for one, support the local police departments, support enforcement, support protection, support laws that would help to make sure that people stay safe within these places. Put your money where your mouth is if you actually care, right? You have connections, you have resources. You can go to a gala and raise money for some nonprofit that you can just say on a veneer, like, oh, I care about this issue. Well, then why don't you do that for the very neighborhoods that you claim to care about? Why don't you create a school? Why don't you do certain things? But they don't, right? And that's why I ultimately get passionate about this. I don't think these people really care. And how you can tell that they care, it's not the words that they use, it's the actions behind the words that they use. When progressives say one thing and do the actions that counteract the very thing that they just said they cared about, that tells me that they don't actually care. So when you say, I care about the safety of Black people, but then you want to defund the police, which would incredibly impact the very neighborhoods that there's high crime at, where there's lots of Black people that live at, I question why you're doing such a thing. And it's because they actually don't care. So I don't want to rant anymore. You might have more questions.
No, it's not ranting. No, it's all helpful. Hey, somebody asked over on ROKFIN. I was hoping you could respond to this.
Sure.
Saying, okay, wasn't it Ice Cube who questioned if Black people vote for Biden, what then? What will Biden do for Black people for their vote? I think we all know the answer to that. Nothing. I just don't feel comparing Ice Cube to Clarence Thomas is a good analogy. Thomas has been an establishment tool. A better comparison would be Clarence Thomas and Larry Elder, both who operate as if they are white neocons and against the best interests of Black people. You could totally respond to that specifically, but I also wanted to just give you a chance to say, I don't think your article is necessarily pushing people to support Clarence Thomas's political leanings or even his work in the Supreme Court. It's calling out the hypocrisy of those who disagree with him and essentially what you're calling racism.
Yeah, so for one, I don't care if people like Clarence Thomas or not. Honestly, I don't even know enough about Clarence Thomas to have a very educated opinion about him. But that's the point. The point is that it's not about him. And when I brought up Ice Cube, I wasn't making a comparison to Ice Cube to Clarence Thomas. If the person was listening, I was saying about Samuel Jackson, because you asked, what do you mean by one day it could be Uncle Samuel? It's just that if someone steers away from a particular thing, even just a little bit, they can start to have their Blackness challenged, their motives challenged, and they can start to be attacked. That's what happened to Ice Cube. Ice Cube didn't even steer away. He just spoke to the wrong people, the quote unquote wrong people, the people he wasn't supposed to speak to as a Black man. They don't do this for anybody else. And also, the interests of Black people, what exactly does that mean? Like, do we all have the same interests? Is there an interest for white people? Is there interest for Hispanic people? And this is part of the problem with identity politics. You know, what am I supposed to care about as a Black man? Mm-hmm. Right? What are my problems?
Right. Yeah.
Are my problems the same as everybody else's problems?
Yeah.
And so this is part of the fundamental issue. And whoever wrote that will not agree with me, and I'm fine with that. But my issue is racism. My issue is the usage of racism, the convenience of racism, right? So when people try to say that conservatives or people on the right think that racism doesn't exist, no, that's not what we think. We think that it's being applied differently, and we disagree on who are the racists within our society. And also, before somebody possibly asks, is there racism on the right? Yeah. But why am I talking about progressives? Because they have institutional power. They have influence. They're part of our government. They're part of our corporate America. They're part of every aspect of control within our society. Yet I'm supposed to worry about some guys with some tiki torches or randos on the internet who say the N-word, and they're in their hive mind somewhere on the internet. Why should I care about those people more than the very people who create laws? You know, why should I care about those people? So yeah, I'm going to talk about progressives more so than randos who are on the right, who have no institutional power, who have no say, who have no influence, really. So, yeah.
Okay, Adam, let me take you over to locals. Again, everybody, if you're not on locals, go join my editorial board, AllisonMorrow.locals.com, because I post usually the day before every live stream or interview who I'm talking to, and then you can put in questions for them yourself. So let's see here. I think that one was a rant. I think it has been evident for years that the whole screaming racism has been all about dividing the country and the radicals accomplishing their satanic agenda. We had a true African-American president for 8 years. Seriously. Do you have any response? Do you want me to go to the next question?
You can go to, I don't even know, that wasn't even a question, but yeah.
I don't know. It was just a rant. Who is most responsible for keeping minorities on the plantation, not the GOP? I think that was another rhetorical question, maybe. After watching Larry Elder get egged by what appeared to be a white woman in a monkey mask, do you see the attacks on Black conservatives becoming more blatant and violent as midterm election draws near?
So, for one, that's why I say, like, we're a minority within a minority. I was part of a discussion where they were talking about Black conservatives or Black Republicans are letting us down and doing certain things. And my response was, well, Black conservatives, for the most part, have no real institutional power that affects Black people directly. For the vast majority of Black-oriented cities, Black areas, I believe it's like 62% of Black Americans live in 10 states, and you can name those states by the cities. They're dominated by Democrats, and so they're generally Black-dominated politically. So if race is the most important part, they're Black dominated. It's not white people who are telling them X, Y, and Z what to do. And if you're looking at the political affiliation of these Black people, they're all Democrats. So when there's failure that's happening right in front of people's faces, they don't have any questions for them because they're Black Democrats. But if a Black Republican says something, or advocates for something, but they have no real control when it comes to that matter. They're just one voice, right? So let's say someone doesn't like Tim Scott. Tim Scott is one guy. He's one senator, right? And I'm not saying that a senator is not a position of power, but he's one guy. When you have more heat for Tim Scott than you do for the mayor of Atlanta or for the mayor of Detroit, who's watching your city crumble, when there's corruption, there's public corruption going on. When you have all these things and you say nothing about it, and it literally hurts the very people that you say you care about, but you got a lot to say about Tim Scott, and you'll call him an Uncle Tom, you'll call him a coon. But what about the Black people who are letting you down? What about the Black people who are hurting other people, who are failing the communities that they claim to care about, who are stealing from them, who are stealing from taxpayers, who are misappropriating funds? This could be a whole other show of Black politicians who got caught embezzling money, who got caught stealing money, misappropriating funds, you name it, corruption, right? Where's your anger for these people who got busted doing it? And that's the hypocrisy when I hear people talking about they want to wag their finger at one Black conservative who might be in government, but have nothing to say about all these corrupt Black officials, right? And I'm only saying Black from the sense that they want to use race as this idea, like representation wholly matters in every single way. If that's the case, then you have corrupt Black people who are part of majority Black neighborhoods who are doing nothing for them, who are stealing from them, misappropriating funds, watching their children fail schools, putting them in environments that are unsafe, defunding the police, taking them, doing all types of jail reform, and making sure that the criminals come out and hurt other people who are law-abiding, right? Who are making laws that they can't arm themselves and protect themselves from the very demons that are on the street who are hurting other people. I got a problem with that, but it appears that people have more of an issue when a Black person says something that they veer away from politically that they think is supposed to be the way. So
what are some of the, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the consequences or just, I don't know, even know, just Twitter pushback you've gotten as you've become more public talking about this kind of stuff? And do you feel like the tide's sort of turning, that at least even if people don't agree with you, it's getting easier to talk about this stuff? I mean, I think a couple years ago, it seemed like if somebody questioned Black Lives Matter as an organization, you were just immediately deemed a racist. Whereas now I think I see a lot of people questioning Black Lives Matter as an organization. And it's, you know, there are probably people who get really mad and maybe they do think you're a racist, but it's not like a cancelable offense anymore. Whereas I think it probably would have been a few years ago. Do you notice a change in one's ability to question these narratives? And what are some of the experiences you've had?
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to Black Lives Matter, as time goes on and they're looking like, what are these people doing? I actually wrote an article for the New York Post giving commentary about their taxes, right? And when you look at, because they're a 501c3, I think they use a 990 form that they have to file with the IRS. And so they have to disclose how much money they received, how much money they spent. And essentially they're hoarding money, right? They gave some money to basically left-wing organizations, but they don't know what to do with that money. And so they're hoarding, I want to say, tens of millions of dollars that they haven't spent. I honestly think they didn't really think it would become that successful, that their organization would be uplifted the way it was, because they clearly don't have a plan, right? So I'm not saying that they have to spend every drop of their money, but when you still have, you know, over 50% of the money that came into you, tens of millions of dollars, just sitting there in a bank account, you don't even know what to do with it. When your goal as a nonprofit, as an organization is supposed to help people, I think they're completely disorganized when it comes to that. So I think more and more people are becoming aware of what Black Lives Matter really is doing, what they actually stand for, and it's easier to criticize them as an organization. To answer your question, as far as myself, I don't really get that much pushback. And it's because I try to discuss race from a way that makes sense. I try to discuss it in a non-hyperbolic way. Like I'm asking questions and I'm pointing out things that people aren't necessarily pointing out, like how we're discussing it now. So, you know, I was discussing this with someone today. Part of the problem on the right, or at least I don't even necessarily think that it's everybody on the right, but part of the problem on the right is that they give the impression that they're saying racism doesn't exist. And so for me, if the left wants to say white supremacy is a problem, okay, I'll agree with you. White supremacy is a problem, but they just don't agree on my definition of white supremacy. All right. If I'm to say that, you know, if I'm to use the left's language, then I'm going to direct it in a way that I think is appropriate for that language. And I think the right needs to understand that trying to paint America as flawless makes them look naive. I think that's kind of like the best way of putting it. But as far as heat that I might get, I personally don't even really care. Occasionally I get, you know, a negative message, and I find those kind of funny. I poke fun at them. But for the most part, 99% of the time, it's been positive. I think the part of the reason why I decided to speak up, because so people understand, I had no public face until a year ago. I didn't speak out. I kept to myself. I didn't even really have social media. I just had like a Facebook account for family. But part of the reason why I felt comfortable saying something is because, one, I stopped caring if people agree with me or not. And two, I know that I'm part of the majority. Majority of the people feel the way that I do. Even if they're liberals, and I am what I would call a former liberal, I'm a former Democrat, but I still believe in some of the liberal principles. And I'm a very moderate person. So I'm not even a hardline conservative. I'm not even a Republican. I'm an independent. But I recognize that I'm actually the majority. You know, everything is skewed towards the extreme. Most people are pretty moderate. there's a lot of independents in this country, and I'm trying to speak to the independents. I don't really care if leftists like me or agree with me, or even the right Trump supporter, right, who's just like Trump, Trump, Trump. I'm not that guy. I don't hate him, but I'm not that guy, right? I take a very moderate approach to most things. So I'm just being critical of what I see.
Okay, 2 questions. I'll read the first one, and then we'll go to the second one after you respond to that. Have you researched the upbringing of Clarence Thomas from his childhood and path to his present position?
Research, no. I mean, admittedly, I don't really think about Clarence Thomas like that. My reaction is more so to people's reaction. I watch people. I watch people's behavior. I'm really into psychology, human behavior. So when I'm talking about Clarence Thomas, I'm looking at the behavior, the reaction to Clarence Thomas, more so than Clarence Thomas himself. So no, I haven't. I'm vaguely aware of his childhood, grew up in very poor means, and built himself up from there. But other than that, I really don't know in great detail.
Have you researched the history of Bohemian Grove?
I very superficially understand Bohemian Grove.
Okay, let me look at some of the YouTube comments, and then I'm going to let you go, Adam. Again, do you want to tell people where they should follow you? I guess I can go over to I'll go to your Twitter and find you there. But what should people do? Tell us about your book, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so people can follow me primarily on Twitter. I'm most active at wrong_speak. They can go to wrongspeak.net to check out articles that myself and other people have written. My book, Black Victim to Black Victor. I give social commentary revolving around race, but it's not purely about race. It's actually deeper than that. I talk a lot about family. I talk about my childhood, growing up in a single home, being homeless, struggling to figure out who I am as a man and becoming a father in the process. So it's a very personal book. It's not actually very political. It's a cultural book. I dive into some psychology and human behavior and childhood development as well, mixed in with storytelling. So I'm biased, but I think it's a very good book. I think it's unique. It's not a Black conservative book. It's a book that just talks about what I think is actually affecting people in surrounding race.
Okay, there were a couple questions that came in on my locals community. Has Mr. Coleman seen any liberals go through minority neighborhoods volunteering and performing cleanup?
Well, for one, I don't live in those neighborhoods, so to even know, I don't think so. I would guess more so no, but to be fair, no one is. I've actually written an article talking about the lack of involvement when it comes to certain areas by Republicans, and it gives the impression that they don't care. And if they do care, then they need to try. They need to actually do something, and we're just talking about politically. If they want to get votes, they have to go into these areas, but they've kind of just, wipe their hands clean and try to go in other areas, and it comes off as them not caring. And I think there are people within particular areas. If there were 2 or 3 election cycles of a Republican who actually did the groundwork and went in there and tried to win people's votes, you might be surprised. So as much as there's Democrat strongholds, they're kind of Democrat strongholds by default. There aren't serious contenders. If there are contenders, they're not getting financial support from the Republican Party. So they're basically there to eventually fail. And that's kind of the reality.
Do you think things are getting stranger and stranger? Or that was the specific question was about, they found a book. They were going through a deceased friend's library. The book was called The Brotherhood of the White Light, which is about mysticism and basically going to heaven. I guess that's what the white light was. And the teacher, a friend of hers, said, that sounds racist. Does he think things are getting stranger and stranger?
I like to use the word silly. Things are kind of silly. I don't know. I think it really just depends on what space you're in. I'm around normal people most of the time. Twitter is a hyper political environment, so it's a different space. But when you get off Facebook, you get off Twitter, you actually just interact with people. At least where I live, and I think where a lot of places are. Like I said, there might be outliers with like San Francisco or even like New York City a bit, but for the most part, like people are people. People are relatively nice to you. It's not a silly world. Matter of fact, there was something that did happen at a store. It was kind of funny. It was an Indian lady who said, what do you think? Because I'm Indian, I can't afford this. And the guy was like, what? Like it was just a weird environment to be in, right? But because it was weird, that means it's not common. It's not usual, right? She was just like hypersensitive. She was trying to make something that wasn't really there. And that stuff is going to happen. So is the world getting sillier? It depends what space you're in. But I think part of the problem is that we're getting fed information through tunnels, whether it be a social media tunnel, a news network tunnel, and we're getting fed viewpoints and outlooks that are negative. And the more you take that in, the more you think that the world is going crazy. But the world's always been crazy. There's always terrible things happening. You can't care about everything everywhere all the time.
Someone on YouTube asked about your thoughts of like Lyndon Johnson and the creation of welfare. And I think more broadly, I'm interested in your thoughts too on maybe not just that specifically, but what do you think would be helpful public policy, if any? Because I think, obviously I'm just going to guess that people would say, like, on sort of your, the sort of other side, the progressive movement that you've talked about today, would say like, well, we have to do something. You're saying that some of these policies, or at least the way they're communicating them, are making things worse, or at least not helping. Do you think there's a role for public policy or not?
So, and this might sound kind of libertarian. I think it needs to be less governmental interference. I think if there's going to be governmental interference, it needs to be local. I'm not a big fan of the federal government and how we run to the federal government for literally everything. When issues arise, most of the time those issues are local. And they need to be seen as local issues, and they need to be treated that way. By us constantly running to the federal government, nothing is ever fixed. But if we're talking about for Black Americans, and I really don't see the government as our ultimate solution. I think running to the government for us is like the default. It's a waste of time. Nothing ever really truly gets done. It's superficial. I really think most changes that would actually help Black Americans are cultural. I think family is the most important aspect that we need to really focus on. And it's not just Black Americans, but we're kind of the canary in the coal mine, warning everybody else, and it's getting worse for all demographics. We as Americans, not just Black Americans, but Americans in general, have the highest single parenthood rate in the world. And I don't think people understand that. So this isn't just a Black people issue. This is an American issue. Our families are being destroyed, right? And in some ways, they're being destroyed by governmental interference, by court systems, by the destruction of our cultural viewpoint of men and the importance of men and fathers in children's lives. This is incredibly personal to me because I grew up without my father, and I am a father today to a son. And I've seen what it's like not having that fatherly role in my life and what I went through. And I've seen what it's like to be a father for my son and how impactful I am to him and how far along he is at the age of 16 than I ever was, right? So if you're telling me that fathers don't matter, I'm not seeing it. And I think common sense says that the role of a healthy father in a child's life and advocating for that for people is extremely, extremely beneficial. And one last thing, I was talking to a social worker who used to work in New York City and the Bronx, and she would go to projects and help families and support them. And she's like, it's so obvious that the biggest issue is that these especially the boys, but these children are growing up without their fathers. The mothers who are raising these children didn't have their fathers, right? It's this cycle that keeps repeating and repeating on the lower end of the economic scale, and it's highly detrimental for them. And all we're doing is repeating the trauma by not having children's fathers in their life. And because of that, I think that's why it's so easy to just say toxic masculinity and dismiss men or see our viewpoints as a threat or unimportant. It's because when you grow up without a man in your life, the first man who's actually supposed to love you and care for you, why would you care about any other man's opinion, right? It's not nearly as important. And especially when the first important man in your life disappoints you, you're going to be easily disappointed by other men. So I see that as the most important issue, most important American issue, but especially for Black Americans as well.
Okay, one final question that sort of relates to that. All of America's problems can be solved within a week if properly done without the financial incentives to not. I guess, what are your thoughts on, well, the problem you just named specifically, financial incentives are there that continue that cycle? And big picture, you know, what I know very well is just the institution of corporate media and journalism. Mm-hmm. And certainly there are financial incentives for these corporations to continue putting out crappy journalism. But the average reporter, like the vast majority of the people, producers, reporters, staff, they are just not thinking to themselves, I'm just financially incentivized to do this. They truly believe in the system. They believe that they're doing God's work in a lot of ways, if they believe in God, which many of them don't. But if they do, you know, so to me, like, for instance, a lot of people will say, well, what if you took advertising out of the news? And to me, I think it would make minimal difference, because I still believe that it's really it's a true believer problem. I mean, there are just a lot of journalists who are just not great critical thinkers. They're not encouraged to be critical thinkers. And they really believe that they're, like you would describe, that sort of savior complex. They would just really believe that that's what they're doing. And you're not going to change that with money. So I'm just curious what you think about, the sort of financial incentives in that specific cycle of fatherlessness that you were talking about. But generally speaking, if you were to try to change things, do you think it's money that is at the root of all of this, or is it gone far beyond that at this point?
I think it really just depends on what we're talking about. You know, I find that when you remove ways that people are able to avoid accountability or responsibility, that's when you really start seeing them change their behavior and start to adjust themselves. Because ultimately, humans adjust to their environment. And so if you change things in a particular way that encourage them to be more self-sufficient and less reliant on whatever it may be, then they'll adjust to it. I'm thinking about what you were saying as far as the journalists. Yeah, I truly believe that they're believers. You know, this is what you experience in journalism is what teachers are experiencing who don't want to be part of this ideology. One of the things that's been interesting about speaking out is that people send me messages of all different types of industries who tell me, like, here's what's going on around me. There are people who are like me who are afraid to speak up, who are afraid to say something, but here's what's happening here. People who are liberals, and they're like, I'm a liberal and this stuff is crazy, who don't see the world through this racist lens that they're forcing them to see the world in. This is an institutional issue. This is coming from elite institutions. And whether we realize it or not, college is an elite institution. Most Americans don't go to college. I believe I last saw it's something like 25 or 30% Americans go for higher learning, or involved in higher learning, something of that nature. I might be messing that up completely, but the fact that not everybody is involved in this, which means not everybody is getting this particular mindset, this viewpoint. And where are these people going after this? I think the mistake that we used to think was that they'll hit the real world and realize that they believed in fairy tales, right? You can be a communist in college, but when you come out, you got to become a capitalist because you got to survive. But when you come out and then the corporations start bending over for you, the young, unreasonable, overreactive, and highly ideological person, and they believe in the same mantra as you as time goes on, like that's a problem. When they start taking on DEI, this is one of the things I was researching for my book. Before George Floyd, DEI within corporations was actually seen as kind of like ineffective. There were certain companies that might do like implicit bias training and stuff like that, but it wasn't widespread. After the death of George Floyd, within a matter of months, DEI grew 123%. It's incredibly lucrative. They have executives who are part of, was it director of inclusion, stuff like that, who make hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? This is a very lucrative industry now. So these are people who believe in their cause. And now they're able to, and actually in a lot of places, they're not even part of human resources, right? So this is another subset of managerial class within corporations. So you have human resources to deal with. You have DEI to deal with as well, who are constantly checking for things and looking for things that maybe don't even exist there, who are been given a lot of power. So I don't know if I'm ranting, but ultimately, like,
well, Adam, one thing you might want to explain, there were a couple people asking, what does DEI stand for? What does it mean?
Yes. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Their job, so to speak, is to make sure, well, I want to say what I think their job is, but their job is to, their job is to basically make people feel inclusive within their work environment, no matter their race, demographic, whatever, ethnicity, which on surface level, like, I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. The problem comes into how they implement it. It can fall into how they employ. Are they ignoring certain people just to fill certain quotas? Are they looking at people who are racial minorities as quota figures, as these, is corporate America becoming ran by people who have a savior complex? I think that's something to be concerned with. As a Black American, I don't want to get a job because I'm Black. I want to get a job because I'm qualified and I happen to be Black. And if that makes you look good, because you're in a particular environment and you just happen to be hiring Black, white, Hispanic, whatever, then I'm fine with that. But I'm always curious about situations where they're purposely overlooking someone because we have enough of these people, because they're men. We need more women in this particular field. So let's throw away the male applicants. So I think seeing the world through that prism of demographics, and we have to force diversity, I think that's detrimental for our entire society. And I think that's incredibly racist from a racial standpoint, sexist if you're just specifically looking to hire one particular sex. It would be bad if they were like, we're only hiring men and avoiding qualified women. I think it's bad the other way around too. But that's ultimately what DEI is supposed to be doing.
It has seemed weird, at least newsrooms to me present a particularly interesting experiment in all of this, I guess, because on one hand, you proclaim to be a place that's trying to report the truth based on curiosity, inquisitiveness, trying to understand different sides and different perspectives. Mm-hmm. But basically the way that they're hiring now and doing that kind of training that you just discussed, to me reflects that we just think if someone looks a certain way, you have diversity, as if like all these people think this way, and these people think this way, and these people think this way, and these people think this way. So if we get all these people that look differently, we'll have people who think differently. But it ends up not being the case at all. In fact, they hire in a lot of ways for, it seems like there's just a lot of ideological homogeny. While you may see diversity on the screen, how does that help you deliver a product that requires different perspectives, different abilities to see different things? I mean, they're basically associating that with race, which, like, to go back to your original point, is like assuming you know what someone thinks or where they came from or what their struggles have been or their triumphs or whatever, just based simply on their skin color, which is it's just an odd phenomenon. And I just think more and more, if you're in a newsroom anyway, and you question that, it just doesn't seem like it's a very hospitable environment. And certainly HR, like you were bringing up HR, in my experience is that they just work for the corporation anyway. They're not really there trying to sift through employee relations. So it's either like you just decide you're going to play ball and then just keep yourself quiet. But you were saying it doesn't even, there's reason to believe anyway, or science to show, I guess, research that shows that it doesn't necessarily change anybody's mind. You're basically just you preaching to the choir anyway in a lot of this training, and then the other people just stay quiet. They don't say anything. And when I was in grad school in 2004, 2007 at Boston University, I remember this. I didn't have language for this because when I was in college 4 years before, you know, this wasn't really a conversation, but I noticed it becoming one in graduate school. And I think Ibram Kendi is actually at BU. So anyway, so that's my connection to him. But and they're like totally off the rails now on so many things at this point. But I remember being there, and one of the really unfortunate consequences that I picked up early on in a lot of ways that this, I think, hampers conversation and growth is that it becomes very clear that there's a right way and a wrong way. I mean, kind of going back, your wrong speak publishing, right? To be able to ask questions or to dissent from a popular view. And it just became clear all it was doing was just like amplifying certain voices, but the people who disagreed, it wasn't changing their minds necessarily because they couldn't even converse about it. They didn't even feel like they could ask questions about it. And to me, if you're like a real evangelist for your cause, I don't know, I guess I would want people to feel comfortable asking questions and engaging and dialoguing. But it just seems like what it's done more than anything is create a very chilling environment for exactly that, for debate, and has teed up cancel culture that we have now and all that stuff. So it just seems like it doesn't necessarily even achieve the goals that are purported for people to want to achieve.
I mean, because ultimately it's not about change, right? It's not about changing for the betterment. It's about changing for the ideology, for the doctrine, right? It's the idea that me and you, we see a problem. We want to examine the problem. And if it requires us changing our behavior or changing a policy, we're doing that because we know that this will change the outcome and it will lead to a possible solution. For them, it is ideological. So it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not, right? That's why people say it's very religious, it's cult-like, because you're just following orders. You're just following the process. If part of the process is that every time you enter a room, you have to knock on the wall 3 times, right? Does that change anything? Well, it's just part of the rules. This is what you have to do. And then what's even crazier for people who are believers is that things constantly change. Things are constantly progressing, hence progressive. But like things are constantly changing for them. And what's interesting for me as someone who's on the outside watching, it's always interesting when one ideological viewpoint clashes with another. So when like feminism clashes with the trans movement, and because they have different interests, but at the same time they're technically part of a very similar doctrine, and so all of a sudden it creates this whole dynamic. But it's because nothing is meant to make sense. It's just about following orders. It's just about following what the ideology preaches, and the ideology is constantly changing because there is no one single figurehead. There are multiple figureheads, and it's a constantly moving ideological framework. So I think ultimately it's not about actually having like a positive effect on society. It's about implementing policy that they believe is supposed to be implemented. And I think in some ways there is a bit of a nefarious nature to it when you are doing something that is the opposite of what you claim is supposed to help people, right? So this isn't even like years ago, you would say, we want to achieve X, all right? Democrats have one approach that could change X. Republicans have one approach that could change X, but they're not that far apart from each other, right? We just want more money. All right, we want a little less money. Like it's not that far apart from each other. What these people are implementing are generally extreme. And then when people call it out on the extreme nature, then they tamper it down. So one of my articles I point out, when they're talking about defund the police, what people don't understand is that they actually want to abolish all forms of social punishment on the extreme end, right? And people don't realize that. This is why they want bail reform. Bail reform is step one to getting rid of as many forms of imprisonment for people. Defund the police. When people said, whoa, that's extreme. When they started saying abolish the police, then they said, no, we meant defund. Well, actually, we mean move funds to different avenues, right? But the reality is that they want a very extreme position, right? Defunding the police or redistributing funds to different areas. That's just a ploy. That's step one to the ultimate goal of abolishing police. So it's completely separate. That's why I don't even think this is totally about political party. I think this is ideological, and this is actually something that whether people consider themselves conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrats, because I talk to both. I talk to liberals. I talk to conservatives. They see eye to eye on the danger that's coming from this particular far left movement, especially because they have so much influence and power in our society.
Somebody in the locals chat suggested people check this out. I don't know if you've heard of Pastor Corey. Oh, come on. Corey Brooks is sleeping in the cold for 100 days. He's got a Project Hood, I think, HOOD. Have you heard of this guy?
No, this is not familiar.
Anyway, I think when you were talking about, when we were discussing, somebody asked a question about, have you seen anybody actually going into communities and doing anything? Anyway, this was just something they suggested checking out. It's trying to, this was an article from 2021 trying to raise money for a community resource center. But anyway, yeah, Corey Brooks and Southside Chicago. Okay, Adam, any final closing thoughts before we go?
Closing thoughts is that I want to encourage people to speak out, speak for themselves, question things, be critical of the world, be critical of society, be critical of me. I don't know everything. I just have my viewpoints. And I think that's how we actually achieve change. I believe in the battling of ideas in a good faith nature. And so I want to encourage people to express themselves. That's why Wrong Speak is the way it is. If anybody is listening, is interested in writing for Wrong Speak, feel free to contact me. But ultimately, I want people to express themselves, especially through writing. Wrong Speak will help platform them, will help you achieve that goal. And we want to foster an environment where it feels like people can't express themselves anymore. And we want to foster an environment with myself leading it and my deputy editor, Audra, who is someone who used to be an avatar. Now she shows her face and uses her name. To be brave and to use their voice and not be afraid. As someone who has had nothing and built myself up, I'm not afraid, really. I'm not stupid. I'm not reckless, but I'm not afraid. And I think more people need to be that. because we are the majority. Regardless if you're liberal or conservative or libertarian, whatever, you're the majority, because I see this as an ideological battle between the extremists.
There was a question about your book being in a terrarium over your shoulder. Or is it in the aquarium? Okay. And they asked why.
I say it's
okay,
actually cute.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think people thought maybe it was in there as like with your, I don't know, a spider or you know, snakes or something.
You know what? I forgot this is here. So this is actually my first article with the New York Post. And so I took the newspaper clipping and I was thinking like, oh, cool. I wrote for the New York Post and I never thought it would happen again. And here we are 9 more articles later. So, you know, we had it framed. So it's just a milestone for me.
Yeah, good for you. That's awesome. You know, I can't show the front. I can't show the front because it has my address on it, but this is my 100th. I should make sure I'm not showing. I don't know what that says either. I showed it one time on a stream like a year ago, and I'm like, oh my God, I just showed my address. But this is my YouTube 100,000 subscriber plaque. And
Wow.
I got it like 6 months ago, but I still have, or maybe even more, 8 months ago. I still haven't opened it yet because I'm so freaking busy. But YouTube has been deleting my subscribers. So I kind of think I want to wait till I'm back to 99K so I can open it when I don't even have 100,000 subscribers anymore. But anyway, yeah. So that's my little award that you're like, well, you're moving in the right direction, Adam. Apparently, I'm not moving in the right direction. But that's what happens when you wrong speak on YouTube. You don't like it very much. Adam Coleman, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody in the chat.
Thank you. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
All right. See you guys next time.